There are mountain passes where the dead don't rest easy, and the living hunt with headlights instead of claws. My name is Vincent Iron Horse Castellanos, and I've been hauling freight through the backbone of America for 31 years. From the gentle slopes of the Appalachians to the brutal grades of the Sierra Nevada, I thought I'd conquered every mountain road this continent could throw at me. The Rocky Mountains were my specialty. Interstate 70 through Colorado, Interstate 80 through Wyoming, the treacherous passes where lesser drivers feared to tread and cargo companies paid premium rates for experienced mountain haulers. But nothing in 3 decades of mountain driving prepared me for that January night when a blizzard turned Interstate 70 into a killing field, and I discovered that some predators don't just follow their prey, they orchestrate elaborate traps, using the mountains themselves as accomplices. Since that night, I can't drive mountain passes without checking every shadow, every side road, every place where headlights might be hiding in wait. The nightmares come in waves, always the same. Headlights appearing where no headlights should be, coordinated like stars in a constellation of death, surrounding me on roads where there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide except straight down 1,000-foot drops into Colorado stone. I was 49 years old then, a second-generation trucker whose father had taught me that the mountains demanded respect, preparation, and constant vigilance. My wife Rosa had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, leaving me with nothing but the road, and a reputation as one of the few drivers crazy enough to haul hazardous materials through Rocky Mountain passes in winter weather. The isolation suited me. Grief and guilt are easier companions than most people, and the mountains provided solitude that no amount of therapy could match. That particular run started in Denver, where I'd picked up a load of industrial chemicals bound for a mining operation outside Grand Junction. The cargo manifest listed sulfuric acid, sodium cyanide, and other substances that could kill entire communities if released improperly. It was exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward freight that had paid for my house, my truck, and my solitary lifestyle for the past decade. The weather forecast called for a major winter storm to hit the Colorado Rockies, with blizzard conditions expected along Interstate 70 through the Eisenhower Tunnel and Vail Pass. Most truckers would have waited for better conditions, but the mining company was facing a production deadline, and they were willing to pay hazard rates that made the risk worthwhile. I left Denver at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in January, when the temperature was already dropping below zero, and the first snow flurries were beginning to swirl around my headlights. My truck was a 2020 Peterbilt 579 with specialized mountain gearing tire chains and enough emergency equipment to survive for days if the weather trapped me in a snowdrift. The trailer was a sealed tanker designed for hazardous materials transport, with multiple safety systems and monitoring equipment that would detect any breach or temperature variation. The first hint that something was wrong came at Morrison, just as Interstate 70 began its climb into the foothills of the Front Range. I was following the standard mountain trucking protocol: reduced speed, increased following distance, constant monitoring of brake temperatures and engine conditions. The road ahead disappeared into swirling snow that was getting heavier with every mile. That's when I saw the first set of headlights. They appeared in my mirrors at milepost 259, maintaining a perfect following distance of exactly a quarter mile despite the deteriorating weather conditions. At first, I assumed it was another trucker or a four-wheel drive vehicle with an experienced driver who knew how to handle mountain winter conditions. But as we climbed toward the town of Morrison, something about those headlights began to bother me. They never varied their distance, never adjusted for curves or changes in visibility, never responded to my own speed variations with the natural fluctuations of human driving patterns. It was as if the vehicle behind me was being controlled by a computer, programmed to maintain precise spacing regardless of road conditions. I tried my CB radio, keying the microphone on channel 19. Breaker 19, this is Iron Horse westbound on I-70 approaching Morrison. Got a driver behind me running about a quarter mile back. You copy, good buddy. Static filled the cab. I tried different channels, different call signs, even the emergency frequency. Nothing but the hiss of empty airwaves and the howl of wind around my cab. At Morrison, the highway split. Interstate 70 continued west toward the mountains, while Highway 285 curved south toward Colorado Springs. I maintained my westbound course, but in my mirrors I watched to see which direction the following vehicle would take. The headlights followed me onto Interstate 70. By Georgetown, 40 miles into the mountains, the storm had intensified to near blizzard conditions. Visibility was down to maybe 50 yards, and snow was accumulating faster than the highway crews could plow it. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero, cold enough to freeze diesel fuel and turn tire rubber into something resembling glass. But the headlights behind me remained constant, still maintaining that precise quarter-mile distance, despite conditions that should have made such accurate spacing impossible for human drivers. That's when I saw the second set of headlights. They appeared ahead of me, parked in a scenic overlook just past the Georgetown exit. As I passed the overlook, the headlights pulled onto the highway behind the first vehicle, creating a convoy of 3 trucks with me sandwiched in the middle. The spacing was too perfect, too coordinated to be coincidental. Both following vehicles maintained identical distances, adjusted their speeds in perfect synchronization with mine, and responded to road conditions with mechanical precision that human drivers couldn't match. I was being herded. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't random traffic or fellow truckers seeking the safety of convoy travel. This was a coordinated operation using multiple vehicles to control my movement through the mountains, keeping me on a predetermined route towards some destination I couldn't see. I reached for my CB radio again, this time transmitting on the emergency frequency. Mayday, Mayday, this is Iron Horse westbound on I-70 near Georgetown, carrying hazardous materials. I'm being followed by multiple vehicles in suspicious coordination patterns. Request immediate assistance from Colorado State Patrol. The response came back immediately, but not from law enforcement. The voice was electronically distorted, mechanically altered, until it sounded like something generated by computer synthesizers rather than human vocal cords. Good evening, Iron Horse. We've been expecting you. The words turned my blood to ice water. Whatever was happening, it had been planned in advance. They knew my CB call sign, they knew my route, and they had equipment sophisticated enough to monitor and respond to emergency frequencies. Who is this? I transmitted back. What do you want? We want your cargo, Vincent Castellanos. Specifically, we want the sodium cyanide and sulfuric acid you're carrying. Industrial quantities of those chemicals are worth millions on the black market. They knew my real name. They knew exactly what I was hauling. They had intelligence about my route, my schedule, and my cargo that could only have come from inside sources. Someone at the shipping company, someone at the destination facility, or someone with access to transportation databases that were supposed to be secure. You're talking about federal crimes, I replied. Theft of hazardous materials, interstate transportation violations, terrorism charges. You're looking at life in prison, only if we get caught. And that's not going to happen, because we've chosen a very remote location for the transfer. The mountains are excellent for disposing of witnesses. Witnesses. The word confirmed what I'd already suspected. This wasn't just cargo theft. They were planning to kill me after taking the hazardous materials, probably dumping my body in some remote canyon where it wouldn't be found for years. The second set of headlights moved closer, reducing the following distance to maybe 100 yards. I could see now that it was a large pickup truck, probably a heavy-duty Ford or Chevrolet with modifications for mountain driving. But I could also see that the front bumper had been replaced with a massive steel ramming guard designed for high-speed collisions. They weren't just planning to steal my cargo, they were prepared to use force to stop my truck if I tried to escape. As we climbed toward the Eisenhower Tunnel, the highest vehicular tunnel in the world, I tried to formulate an escape plan, but the geography was working against me. Interstate 70 through the Colorado Rockies was essentially a single corridor with few alternate routes, especially in winter conditions. The mountains on both sides rose to over 13,000 feet, with slopes too steep for vehicle travel and canyons too deep for survival. If I was going to escape, it would have to be on the highway itself, using the hazardous materials I was carrying as weapons if necessary. The Eisenhower Tunnel was a 1.5 mile long bore through the Continental Divide, connecting the eastern and western slopes of the Rocky Mountains. Inside the tunnel there was no escape, nowhere to turn, nowhere to hide, and no radio communication with the outside world. As we approached the tunnel entrance, the electronic voice crackled through my CB radio again. When you exit the tunnel, you'll see a rest area on the right side. Pull into that rest area and stop. If you try to continue past it, we'll ram your trailer and rupture the chemical tanks. The resulting spill will kill everyone in a 50-mile radius, including you. The threat was credible and terrifying. A high-speed collision involving hazardous materials could indeed cause a catastrophic release that would turn the Colorado mountains into a toxic wasteland. They were using the dangers of my own cargo as leverage against me, but they were also revealing a crucial weakness in their plan. They needed me to cooperate in order to avoid creating an environmental disaster that would bring massive federal investigation. If I could force them into a position where their only options were letting me escape or causing the very catastrophe they wanted to avoid, I might be able to turn their leverage against them. The tunnel was a nightmare of echoing engine noise, diesel fumes, and claustrophobic darkness, broken only by overhead lights that created strobing patterns on the wet tunnel walls. Behind me, the headlights of my pursuers reflected off the tunnel surface, like the eyes of predators following prey through an artificial cave. I used the tunnel's communication-free environment to check my emergency equipment and formulate a plan. The hazardous materials trailer had manual dump valves that could be operated from the tractor cab in case of emergency. If I could create a controlled spill at the right location, I might be able to use the chemicals as weapons against my attackers. Sodium cyanide gas was lethal in small concentrations, while sulfuric acid could eat through metal and flesh with equal efficiency. Both chemicals were dangerous to me as well, but with proper wind conditions and careful positioning, I might be able to create a hazardous zone that my attackers couldn't cross. As we exited the tunnel on the western slope, I saw the rest area they'd mentioned, a small parking facility carved into the mountainside with spectacular views of the surrounding peaks. But I also saw something else that made my heart race with hope. A Colorado State Patrol vehicle was parked in the rest area, its overhead lights flashing as the trooper conducted what looked like a routine safety inspection of another commercial vehicle. I keyed my CB microphone and transmitted on the emergency frequency, knowing that my pursuers could hear everything I said. Colorado State Patrol, this is Iron Horse in the westbound hazmat truck approaching the Loveland Pass rest area. I have an emergency situation with multiple vehicles attempting cargo theft. Officer needs immediate assistance. But instead of the response I'd hoped for, the electronic voice came back with a chilling announcement. That's not a real state trooper, Iron Horse. That's one of our people in a stolen patrol car. The commercial vehicle he's inspecting belongs to us as well. You're driving into an ambush, not a rescue. The scope of their operation was staggering. They had multiple vehicles, stolen law enforcement equipment, coordination systems that could monitor emergency frequencies, and enough inside information to know my exact route and cargo manifests. This wasn't a desperate robbery attempt. It was a military-style operation planned and executed with professional precision. I had perhaps 30 seconds to decide whether to pull into the rest area, as instructed, or attempt to escape by running past the ambush. The fake state trooper was already moving toward the rest area entrance, positioning his stolen patrol car to block my exit if I stopped. The commercial vehicle that was supposedly being inspected was actually a mobile command center, probably filled with communication equipment and additional personnel. I made my decision. Instead of slowing down to enter the rest area, I downshifted and floored the accelerator, aiming my 40-ton rig directly at the stolen patrol car that was trying to block the highway. The Peterbilt's mountain gearing provided massive torque at low speeds, and even with hazardous materials requiring careful handling, I had enough power to punch through most obstacles. The collision with the patrol car was spectacular, metal screaming against metal, glass exploding in glittering showers, the lighter vehicle tumbling off the highway and down a steep embankment like a crushed toy. But the impact also damaged my truck's front axle and sent spiderweb cracks across my windshield. Behind me, the two pursuing vehicles had closed distance and were now ramming my trailer in alternating attacks, each collision sending shockwaves through the entire rig and threatening to rupture the chemical tanks. I could feel the trailer fishtailing on the snow-covered highway, the heavy load of hazardous materials shifting dangerously with each impact. The electronic voice filled my cab again, now containing unmistakable rage at the failure of their ambush. "You've just killed yourself, Iron Horse. We're going to ram your trailer until those tanks rupture, and then we're going to watch you die from chemical exposure." But their anger was making them careless. The ramming attacks were becoming more violent and less controlled, increasing the risk that they would cause exactly the kind of catastrophic spill they'd originally wanted to avoid. If I could use their fury against them, if I could manipulate them into making a tactical error, At milepost 216, just before the descent toward Vale Pass, I saw my opportunity. The highway curved sharply around a mountain face with a steep drop-off on the right side that plunged hundreds of feet into a snow-filled canyon. The guardrail was designed to stop passenger cars, not 40-ton trucks traveling at highway speeds. I waited until both pursuing vehicles had moved into ramming positions, then suddenly veered toward the guardrail as if I'd lost control. Both attackers swerved to avoid going over the edge with me, giving me a crucial few seconds to regain control and accelerate away from them. But the maneuver also revealed something terrifying. There were more headlights ahead. 3 vehicles were positioned at strategic locations on Vale Pass, their headlights dark, but visible as silhouettes against the snow-covered landscape. As my truck approached, the headlights blazed to life, creating a gauntlet of ambush positions that stretched for miles along the mountain highway. They had anticipated every possible escape route, positioned vehicles at every strategic location, and created a kill zone that extended across multiple mountain passes. This wasn't just a robbery, it was a military-style operation designed to eliminate any possibility of escape or survival. The electronic voice crackled through my radio again, now containing satisfaction at the revelation of their full deployment. "Now do you understand, Iron Horse? We've been planning this for months. Every escape route is blocked, every hiding place is covered, every possible move has been anticipated. You're going to die on this mountain, but first, you're going to give us those chemicals." But their comprehensive planning contained a fatal flaw. They were so focused on controlling my movement that they'd positioned themselves in predictable patterns. If I could turn my truck into a weapon, if I could use the hazardous materials as offensive tools rather than just cargo to be protected. The first ambush vehicle opened fire as I passed its position, bullets sparking off my trailer and shattering the remaining intact windows in my cab. But I was ready for the attack, having activated the manual dump valve for the sulfuric acid tank just before entering their kill zone. A stream of concentrated acid began flowing from the rear of my trailer, creating a chemical hazard that forced the pursuing vehicles to fall back or risk having their tires and undercarriages dissolved by one of the most corrosive substances known to chemistry. The second ambush vehicle tried to ram me from the side as I passed its position, but the driver hadn't anticipated the acid stream. His front tire hit the chemical spill and immediately began disintegrating, sending his vehicle spinning off the highway and into a snow-filled ditch. But using the hazardous materials as weapons was also creating dangers for me. The acid vapors were seeping into my cab despite the ventilation systems, burning my throat and eyes, making it difficult to see the road ahead clearly. If the wind changed direction, if the concentration increased, if I made any mistake in controlling the chemical flow. The third ambush vehicle was the largest and most heavily armored, a modified semi-truck with steel plates welded to its cab and a ramming guard that looked capable of punching through concrete barriers. It pulled onto the highway directly ahead of me, blocking both lanes and forcing me to choose between a head-on collision and driving off the mountain. I chose a third option. At the last possible moment, I activated the dump valve for the sodium cyanide tank while simultaneously steering toward the narrow shoulder between the blocking truck and the guardrail. The deadly gas began billowing from my trailer just as I squeezed past the ambush vehicle, creating a toxic cloud that enveloped both trucks. The wind was blowing away from my cab, carrying the cyanide gas toward the blocking vehicle, whose occupants had no protection against chemical weapons. Through my mirrors, I could see figures abandoning their truck and stumbling away from the toxic cloud, but whether they escaped in time was beyond my knowledge or concern. Behind me, the remaining pursuit vehicles had fallen back to avoid the expanding chemical hazard zone. But ahead of me, Vale Pass stretched into darkness, and I had no way of knowing how many more ambush positions were waiting in the night. My truck was badly damaged from the ramming attacks and collision with the patrol car. The steering was loose, the engine was running rough, and warning lights were flashing across my dashboard. Most critically, I'd used significant quantities of my hazardous materials cargo as weapons, creating environmental hazards that would require massive cleanup operations and federal investigation. But I was alive, and my attackers were scattered and disrupted, their carefully planned operation destroyed by tactics they hadn't anticipated. The electronic voice crackled through my radio one final time, now containing defeat and rage in equal measures. "This isn't over, Iron Horse. We know who you are. We know where you live and we have resources you can't imagine. You may have escaped tonight, but there will be other nights, other mountains, other opportunities." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to predators who turned mountain highways into killing grounds and hazardous materials into tools of terrorism. The only appropriate response was survival, escape, and eventual justice. At Vale, I managed to reach a truck stop where I could contact law enforcement agencies and hazardous materials response teams. The story that emerged from my debriefing was almost too complex to believe. A sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in stealing hazardous materials by using military-style tactics to ambush isolated truckers in remote mountain locations. The investigation that followed revealed the scope of their operation. Stolen law enforcement vehicles, modified commercial trucks equipped as mobile command centers, communication systems capable of monitoring emergency frequencies, and inside sources providing cargo manifests and route information. But most disturbing was the discovery that I wasn't their first target. At least 8 other hazmat truckers had disappeared in the Colorado Rockies over the past 2 years, their trucks found abandoned in remote canyons with no trace of either the drivers or the hazardous materials they'd been carrying. The chemicals had been sold on the black market to terrorist organizations, foreign governments, and criminal enterprises that used them for everything from manufacturing illegal drugs to creating weapons of mass destruction. My cargo alone, industrial quantities of sodium cyanide and sulfuric acid, would have been worth millions of dollars to buyers who didn't care about environmental regulations or human safety. The environmental cleanup from my defensive use of the chemicals took 6 months and cost the state of Colorado over $20 million. Federal agencies had to evacuate communities, test water supplies, and monitor air quality across hundreds of square miles of Rocky Mountain wilderness. But the alternative would have been worse. If the criminal organization had succeeded in stealing my cargo, if those chemicals had reached their intended black market destinations, the damage to human life and national security would have been incalculable. The legal proceedings dragged on for 3 years, with federal prosecutors trying to sort through complex jurisdictional issues involving multiple states, environmental crimes, terrorism charges, and organized criminal enterprise laws. I testified before grand juries, congressional committees, and federal courts, describing the night when headlights had waited at every turn through the Colorado mountains. The publicity made me a target for revenge attacks, copycat criminals, and conspiracy theorists who believed I was part of some government cover-up. I had to leave Colorado and establish a new identity in a different state, abandoning the mountain routes I'd driven for 3 decades. But I also became a symbol for truckers who refused to become victims of increasingly sophisticated criminal enterprises. The hazmat industry implemented new security protocols, convoy requirements, and emergency response procedures based partly on lessons learned from my encounter with the mountain ambush team. The nightmares took years to fade, and they never completely disappeared. Every mountain pass, every curve where headlights might be waiting, every radio transmission on emergency frequencies, all of it triggered memories of that January night when predators had turned the Rocky Mountains into a hunting ground. But I'd survived by refusing to be passive prey. When faced with overwhelming odds and military-style tactics, I'd used the very cargo they wanted to steal as weapons against them. The hazardous materials that made me valuable as a target also made me dangerous as an opponent. The mountains had taught me that some predators hunt with sophisticated planning, advanced equipment, and ruthless determination. But they'd also taught me that even the most carefully orchestrated operations could be disrupted by victims who refused to cooperate with their own destruction. The headlights that had waited at every turn weren't just positioning for an ambush. They were revealing the locations of my enemies, showing me exactly where to aim when I turned my truck into a weapon and my cargo into chemical warfare agents. Since that night, I've never driven mountain passes without remembering that predators can be patient, organized, and equipped with resources that rival military operations. But I've also never forgotten that they can be defeated by ordinary truckers who understand that survival sometimes requires using everything at your disposal, including the dangerous cargo you're hauling, as tools for fighting back. The road through the Rockies is still beautiful, still inspiring, still one of the most spectacular drives in America. But it's also a reminder that human predators can turn any landscape into a hunting ground, any highway into a kill zone, and any cargo into either a target for theft or a weapon for defense. The choice between victim and survivor often comes down to recognizing the threat early enough and being willing to fight back with whatever resources are available. On that January night, my resources included some of the most dangerous chemicals on Earth. I used them all.